Good morning. The first ever meeting of the Referrals Committee shall come to order. Would the city manager / clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Biss?
Here.
Councilmember Ravel?
Here.
Councilmember Fleming?
Here.
We have a quorum and are ready to do business. As I understand it, no one has sought the ability to give public comment. I'll pause for a moment to allow the world to correct me about that. Seeing no online or in-person request to give public comment, we'll move on to item 4 on our agenda, which is discussion of methods and processes for the Referrals Committee. For the benefit of the public, I want to explain that if you go to the agenda, which can be found on the webpage of the Referrals Committee, which can be linked to from the city's webpage that lists all of the committees, on the agenda you will see a link to a spreadsheet, a publicly accessible Google document called the Referral Tracker. That document includes all as I understand it, all referrals that have either been made or addressed since the new council took office on May 10th. And so you'll see some are grayed out, which indicates they've been addressed already. Some are not grayed out but have a date, which indicates that a committee already has plans to include that item on their agenda for a particular date. Some items don't have a date but have a committee named, which means it's clear there's an agreement upon what committee the item would go to, but not when it would be heard. And some items have neither. So there's kind of a hierarchy of how far along in the process items are. And I think this document will be a place, at least for now, for us to park our decisions. I have in front of me a list of items that I wanted to discuss regarding how we go about this work. But before I continue monopolizing, let me pause and see if members of the committee want to guide the discussion that we're about to have. Councilmember Ravel.
I'm thinking that first we're going to talk about sort of our criteria or our guidelines before we actually talk about the specific items to be referred.
So the way the agenda is structured is exactly as you said. First, it's kind of a meta discussion and followed by an actual discussion. But I would say that the meta discussion, which is item 4 on our agenda, for me comes in a whole bunch of parts as well, of which honestly the last part might be the criteria, or a middle or later part might be the criteria. The question I wanted to ask first, which has obviously been a live topic at the Rules Committee, is what exactly is our job? You know, there was obviously some back and forth about are we literally putting items on committee agendas, which I think we were not empowered to do, frankly, or are we doing something else? And if we're doing something else, what exactly is it? And I have a proposal that I want to float by you, if that's okay, which is it seems to me that we have a 2-step process that we might contemplate. One is pick a committee. So like if you go on the tracker and you look at row 28, which is Councilmember Burns' referral HWE policy, and you go to column F, the council is listed as the councilor committee is listed as TBD. So one job would be to simply literally decide where the thing ought to go. And then you go to the next column and there's these scheduled agenda dates, and obviously we don't have the authority to fill that in a binding way, but I think we ought to do something there. And what I would propose for your consideration is just that we essentially have a switch we can flip that declares the item ready for consideration. And at that point, our expectation, which may or may not be met, would be that, hey, then it would get put on an agenda for the relevant committee essentially immediately. So that's kind of how I've contemplated it. I'm not wedded to it, but I thought that would be kind of an approach that might work. Either of you have reactions to that?
So what we'd be saying, we think it's ready to go because it either is like a discussion item that doesn't need a staff memo, or, I mean, how will we decide if it's ready to go?
Well, and that's, I think, the question that Councilmember Revelle raised of, what are our criteria? But, it'd be sort of some combination of either it doesn't require much of a memo, or staff has done legwork so the memo is close to ready, plus there's room, the committee has time to consider it, stuff like that.
Okay, and then for that scheduled agenda date, if we said this was, ready to go, would we write something in there like should make the agenda next month, or should make the next meeting, or something vague in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I would, not to be too technical about it, but I would probably support adding an additional column, because I don't think scheduled agenda date is something that we ought to be filling in, because it's just literally not something we're allowed to fill in. So I would say a different column that would include, our advice to the committee, let's say, or something like that, so that we're able to articulate our recommendation without sort of pretending that it's something it's not.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess my mind works a little bit backwards, and that, like, figuring out the criteria and all those things first.
May I interject just for a second?
Please.
So my understanding of one of the purposes behind this committee and why it was thought by the council to be necessary was that there was, more referrals than there was actually time available to hear them all at an agenda. So the goal, I think, of this committee is to prioritize those. We may have 10 that are ready to go, but which ones are the most important to get on the agenda first? And while the committee may feel like it doesn't have the authority to actually schedule, I think that having me here in collaboration with you is to help you understand what's currently scheduled on specific agendas and what slots might be available for those that the committee seems to be the ones that should be prioritized, if that's helpful at all.
That is, except that only tells us, so looking at this, if we say, okay, let's go just by date, so we have something on here that was a referral that was made 5/15. So if, and it says not scheduled yet, I don't know exactly why it's not scheduled, but if we said, okay, well, just because this one has been on the agenda, the referral was made so long ago, we think that one should go into the next Human Services meeting. Is that what you're getting to? Like, we would prioritize, I mean, we would have other criteria to prioritize, but something that's been referred so long ago, it seemed like would be worth us saying, hey, we need to get that on the agenda. Now, we don't know what else, just from this sheet here, is already on the Human Services agenda. And it's going to take, in my opinion, some redundancy to say, hey, city manager, hey, staff, we think this one needs to come up for at least discussion because it's been referred so long ago. And then have you guys come back and say, well, we can't have it for discussion because the calendar's already full. And then we're kind of in this back and forth. So I guess my other question is there a way for us to see what's already pending on agendas? Is that a function that we currently have in the city where you can, someone can be giving us that information so we have an idea of what we're looking at? Because right now, if we make these suggestions or recommendations for where things should be placed, and we have to wait for your team to tell us what's already there, we're kind of doing double work.
So yes, we have a schedule that has the tentative agenda items for future committee and council meetings. We could do a couple of things. We could bring that up on the thing over there and look at it while you guys are discussing, and so that you see like where things are and what's sort of slated out. Or the other thing we could do is, if you look at this referral tracker, we could add a second column that allows you to prioritize the ones that aren't scheduled, 1 through 10, 1 being the most important to get on the very next agenda when possible, and then the second, third, fourth, on and on and on. So there's like 2 different ways I think we could look at actually putting these in where where you think they should go. And maybe, yeah, but they don't have a plus or minus on those, so you guys can discuss whether or not you think one is better than the other.
Well, some of it I think we're just going to have to figure out as we go along.
Yeah.
I agree with that, but I think we should figure out what the format of our product is, right? Or do we want to rank items? Do we want to, green light, red light items? I think we should pick something and start with that.
Right. Well, ranking them sounds like we're putting different items in competition with each other. And I guess I would say, we would say, I don't know why I'm not having a voice this morning. This is a high priority item. We may have, at the end of the day, or the end of the morning, have 5 high priority items. They may not all even be for the same committee, but, and then we'd have sort of, here's a second level priority. And it may be second level because we acknowledge that it's going to require more staff time or something. It's not that it's not as important as a first priority issue, but it's just not ready yet.
And so there you're envisioning producing kind of a set of tiers of priority?
Well, I guess I would say I'd look at each item separately from all the others, and we'd get through. I'm looking at the first item, which of course is the most recent one, from Mayor Biss, options to make downtown Evanston more walkable. I would say, okay, we're going to look at this, and is this time sensitive? Does this, I sent you all a list of my, draft five criteria I used as I looked at these. Is it going to require a lot of staff resources to get us ready to talk about it? Is it an issue that relates to policies we already have here in Evanston, or is it a brand new area? Is there likely to be a lot of community interest in it, so we're going to want to have some community meetings? And is it likely to be something that's going to generate a lot of community controversy? So I would rank this item on those 5 criteria, and I came out with a number. And that number, the higher the number is, the lower it would be on my priority list as a recommendation to the city staff.
And then your recommendation is that the output of this committee is that number?
Possibly. The number with some
Explanation.
verbiage, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that process sounds great. I'm not sold on the output, because I want the output to be simple and clear. I think the more clarity of what we actually generate, the less opportunity there is for all of the things we don't want to happen.
I guess, again, my brain just works in a certain way, right? So I guess my thought is, because we need to communicate this to our peers, right? So how their referrals go through this new system, is that we would kind of make that system, and then based on that, kind of figure out what the end product is. And maybe that's just, so when I make a referral from the dais, I know, how to make these referrals now, where they go, and, when they go somewhere, which is us, what we're looking at. And I do like the ranking system. I mean, people can just agree with kind of the ranking or score their thing gets, but I think if we say we're looking at these 5 criteria, here's where we thought this referral ranked in that criteria. Also, this is what's already on Human Services agenda, for example, and so this is our recommendation. This would go to Human Services kind of in 2 months versus 1 month. It's a committee that only meets once a month, so it's a little different, but and kind of this is the rationale for that.
If the two of you want to talk that through first, that's fine. My bottom line is I don't want to leave this meeting without total clarity on what our product is, right? I don't want to walk. There's going to be some things that we walk away today from sort of totally clear on, and some things we walk away kind of still needing to resolve. And I want one of the things that we're clear on is when this committee has done its work on a particular referral, we say this, whether that's a date or a green light or a number or a ranking or what. I think that needs to be resolved this morning. So if you want to table that now and then go to talking about sort of the process, that's fine with me, if that would make it easier to sort of back our way into the other question.
Well, I guess we need to figure out, so, you're saying we can, my thought from this committee was that we were going to make the process, and yes, the product would be, as a committee, this referral is, clear and accurate. It's going to go to Human Services. This memo is going to take a long time, so it's going to go to Human Services in 3 months, or it's going to be 3 months because Human Services is already full, or whatever the case is, and that would be the product. And I don't know if that product is in the form of, when you say product, I don't know if we're talking about a tangible product that we would then be able to tell our peers, like.
No, but by product, what I mean is you're saying a recommended date, right? Like to me, the whole ballgame is how we articulate the priority and order. And your answer is a recommended date, which is a fine answer. I don't think we've decided that, and I wanted to make sure we
I guess
decide
that was my assumption of this committee, but then you also said we don't have the authority to put the date on there. So then I'm a little bit lost. Granted, I can't say on the June 22nd, AP&W committee, this thing is going to be on that agenda, guaranteed, item number 5 for discussion. We can't do that because I think there's a lot of things that come into play on every agenda. But I think we can give a recommendation, like this should go in the next month, this should go in the next 2 months, this should, this is a discussion item so it can go faster because we don't have a memo to produce.
Yeah, that's a thing we can do. All I'm saying is that there's a lot of different things we could do, and that's one of them. And if that's what we want to do, we should say that and put that question to bed. Right? That's a very different approach than saying we're going to run this formula and then spit out a number and then give that numerical score to the chair of the AMPW committee. Right? Like there's a lot of different.
No, I think we give them a recommendation of whether it's based on a score, whatever it is. We say to AP&W or to city manager's office and the clerk's office and the AP&W chair, here are the things that we think fit whatever criteria we've come up with or have gone through whatever process, and that should get on the agenda in the next 60 days. Here is that list.
Okay.
And there might be something that comes through to us that we think is so time sensitive that we're going to say, even though your agenda for the next month is really full, we really want you to make room for it right ASAP.
Okay. Well, Councilmember Revelle, it sounds like you're in agreement with Councilmember Fleming about this approach?
Yeah, I think we'll know what the product is once we kind of talk through some of these items.
Okay.
These are the two
I think
social
Councilmember Fleming
thinkers versus the mathematician.
What's that?
I think these are the two social thinkers versus the mathematician. I just think our brains are different in the way we come to conclusions, which is great.
Well, I think you articulated a conclusion, though, is the thing, and I just want to make sure we agree about it.
Well, but we might change it as we go through the process.
Well, that's always true. All right, moving on. So I think it would make sense then for Councilmember Revelle to describe the proposed scoring mechanism that she's put so much time into, so we can talk about it.
Sure. Well, so I did think that one of the first critical things to look at is how time sensitive is this issue? Is it something, because we've had a couple of new items that have come to the council unexpectedly, but they were time sensitive because the idea was to make some changes this summer. So I would say, so that would get a 1 on my, the lower the number, the better in my score. So that would get a 1. Because I do, if we're going to talk about it, it would make sense to talk about it right now. Then other items on here are not at all time sensitive. They may be important, but, I would give them, so I would rank them from, is it time sensitive, somewhat time sensitive, or not time sensitive? Then my second criteria would be scope, and by that I'm thinking of staff resources that would have to go into research or drafting a proposed ordinance or, some kind of a detailed memo. So is it low in terms of the demand on staff resources, or is it moderate, or is it high demand on staff? The third area was, is it something that's taking an existing city policy and saying, gosh, this isn't working, we need to amend it, or we need to expand it, or is it a totally brand new area that we don't have anything in our code that addresses this topic? So it's either it moves from modifying an existing policy all the way to a totally brand new policy area. The fourth one is sort of the community interest. Is it something that we, the council, are going to be able to just kind of talk among ourselves, or the committee, et cetera, with some, public comment and those sort of a normal, pretty contained amount of discussion? Or is it something that the community's really going to want to engage in, and we're going to want to have community input on a pretty broad scale, a detailed basis? So I would say low means not anticipating having any additional kinds of community meetings other than what happens here in the council chambers or in a committee meeting, all the way to high community interest where we'd want to have town halls or something like that. And then the third area was, is it likely to generate a lot of not only community interest but community controversy? And so is it, because that's obviously going to end up, if it's high on the community controversy criteria, it would be, something that would be pretty time intensive for council members and for staff. So those are the ones that I came up with as I was trying to think through these items.
Councilmember Fleming, do you have any reaction to that?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. The only thing I would add is if it's something that someone put a referral in that's for discussion, then maybe these things don't, they could count, but maybe they don't count, right? A discussion item probably is going to it has no memo usually. So I think we can still run it through theirs, but those might have a kind of a different score because all these things might not be applicable. And then the only other thing I thought of is, and maybe something like this would not meet even this, wouldn't get to this point, but when the referral comes in, is there clarity for us to even make a decision? Right, do we need more clarity? But that referral, I would assume we as a committee would tend back to our peers and say, we just need more information to even kind of run it through this new scoring, so then that wouldn't matter. Yeah, but this I think is plenty of coverage. I think having 3 versus like a scale of 5 makes a lot of sense. Again, people can debate this, and I think we'll just have to be open for that if our peers feel like my thing should have scored differently. But I think these are pretty clear that they should not be very difficult to do or people to understand.
Let me jump in first, and then I'll call on you. So first of all, I think this is great, and thank you for putting all this effort in. I have 4 questions. One thing that I think is not here that would be worth contemplating is the level of enthusiasm and support on council. Are there multiple people who want to see this discussion happen, and if so, how many and with what intensity? One item that I think isn't really here, that is a little delicate but probably worth considering, is the importance of the issue relative to our stated goals, right? Like, I made a referral, it's something I care about, but it's not really about CARP or equity or housing affordability, so maybe that's...
Walkability is our CARP goal.
It's true, walkability is a CARP goal. All right, well, hooray, good job, Daniel.
You get points
did
for
it.
that.
But, I know we I think talk regularly about how maybe we could afford to update and be more clear and persistent in sticking to our council goals, but should alignment with those goals be an issue here? The next question, I totally understand that items D and E, community interest versus community controversy, are identical, but they're sort of similar. Do we need 2 different categories for those? And the final question is to react to Councilmember Fleming's characterization, this is definitely not a math exercise in the sense that we don't want to be bound to the number outcome, right? Because time sensitivity could theoretically trump everything. So I guess the question is, this seems like a really useful exercise to go through. Are we worried about producing actual numbers that the world will see, be able to compare with each other, and then our final judgment is, by the way, ignore what that number says? So those are my 4 questions.
So I do think D&E could be one thing. The council goals I think are important. However, we haven't made council goals. So we would be reacting council goals made from the last council that I would even say, I don't know how much time we spent on those council goals versus sometimes staff bringing us the goals. So I think that is important, but that is maybe something we can't, I don't know. We as a new council have not made council goals. So that's just something to consider as we're judging these things. And then the other thing is how much support it has. I don't really know how we gauge that, right? So your referral about sidewalks or walkability that I didn't even know until I looked at this memo. Like, are you going to be the one who put the referral in to say, like, this has full council support? Or are we going to go back and ask people if they support this? Like, I don't know, particularly referrals that might be made, directly to the city manager. I just don't know how I'm going to gauge how much support something has.
Well, let me answer that. What I'm envisioning is just giving an extra tool to an eager council member who's trying to get their thing heard faster. Is if they have the opportunity, if they feel like it, to go to other people and say, hey, would you send an email to the clerk and the referrals committee seconding this particular referral? And if we get several of those, that's an indication. Rather than putting the onus on us to go and survey people and all
Okay.
that stuff.
But then that, to me, seems like a different weighted measure, because if I go and get 5 people who are really interested in my thing, but Eleanor's thing is more time sensitive because it deals with money or, whatever else, it could,
Well, that's the whole exercise, right?
that's where we get to the math piece.
Well, no, that's where we get to the hard work, that there's competing. I mean, clearly these are already competing criteria. The question is, does having the support of 5 people on council count as another competing criterion that we don't need to. I'm just, as some of us have discussed, I think offline, one way that other communities deal with this problem is to say your issue doesn't get heard until you have a certain number of people on the council who are willing to say that they all support it. I think we don't want that here in Evanston, because we know that each ward is different, and we don't want to force a council member to get the support from a lot of people to even have an item heard. The question is, do we want to take that as an indication that something ought to be kind of moved up the list because there's so much interest? If the answer is no, that's fine.
I think it's worth being on our list for sure. I just don't know how we weight it compared to something that's time sensitive, or, because time sensitive could be a variety of things. It could be like a budget matter that we need to solidify pretty soon. So I definitely think it should be on there. I guess I'm just not sure.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we have sort of a secondary set of criteria, if we want to call them that we consider to help us distinguish.
All right, I'm going to weigh in as a mathematician now.
Okay,
I think we are in danger of landing in too complicated territory already. I think another layer of complexity on top of this type of structure, I think, would be a mistake. I think we don't want someone to need to get a PhD in referralsology to be able to understand what we're doing here. And I worry that if it's, okay, here's the primary criteria and they give us this number, here's the secondary criteria, and in case of a tie, the tiebreaker number is, I just feel like, it's complicated.
Okay, so what if we combine D and E into some other, just community interest? And we know the interest could be positive or negative, and we understand that. And then E has support of several council members or whatever, right? Has some council support, or, something very vague. And what was your other one, Daniel?
Yeah, but I'm still uncomfortable with that council member interest thing. I'm thinking about my one referral on here, which is, we want to have the bird-friendly provisions into when we update our building code, which we're doing this summer, I want to make sure there's a bird-friendly, but that's not something that's on most of my colleagues' radar screen, I think. Do I need to?
I'm certainly happy leaving it off if you prefer. As someone who I guess has backed himself into advocating for it, I would say the rejoinder to that is, number one, this committee, I'm committed, I believe all of us are committed to the notion this committee's job is not to hold things up, period. And number two, I would say, first of all, you just explained why it's time sensitive, right? So then it's kind of case closed. But even if that weren't the case, I would say, you know what, I think if you went around to council members and said, I really care about this thing and it's not getting heard because there's this sense that nobody cares besides me, would you drop Stephanie a note and say that you actually care about it? I think you'd get some uptake on that.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure I would get support for it, but it just seems like, I don't know, maybe that's something that would make council members think twice before they start making referrals because they know they need to talk to their colleagues first. Maybe that's a good thing.
I also feel like we're humans with personalities. And so the person who gets on everyone's nerves, who might be me, might not get support for my thing because people just don't want to hear me have another thing. And so I think we have to be very honest about that being another layer when my items being heard has to do with me potentially getting more support, and getting that support might be hindered based on people's personal feelings of me.
I'm hearing pretty significant resistance to this idea from two of the three-member committee, and continuing in my mathematician role, I believe the two is a majority of three, and I think we should just cast it aside and move on.
But I think
which I'm totally comfortable with.
But I think it's something to consider. I don't know if it just goes on our matrix here, or if someone just says that, like, hey, I have a lot of support for that, and we can consider that, but it's not a requirement to get your thing.
Yeah, I think we can also sort of like de facto it can become an aspect of time sensitivity, right? If a bunch of our colleagues are beating down our doors,
Perfect.
that would make it feel time sensitive, right?
Perfect.
I think we should move on just because I know
Perfect.
that you have a hard stop at 10.
Well, and I can stay a little longer.
Okay. So are we still comfortable with merging D and E?
I am.
Yeah, as long as we acknowledge that it's both positive and negative.
Understood.
Yeah.
And we're comfortable, at least for now, leaving off this issue of council support. I think Councilmember Fleming was concerned about a kind of alignment with goals because we don't really have enough clarity on that to be confident about that.
No, I mean, I think it's a good thing to do. I just think that we need to acknowledge that this council is working under goals that were not set by them. I assume at some point we're going to set goals. That will be something that we have on our agenda.
Perhaps someone should make a referral.
Well, we do have some things like our CARP goals. And it does seem to me we've talked about affordable housing as a priority.
Yeah. So let's leave it on there, but understanding that our goals may change as we go along. Yeah.
So we have this list with D and E merged with a sort of alignment with city priorities or whatever we want to call it added. Was there something else that we add? Okay.
No, but it might make sense since we're not showing anything on a PowerPoint to just kind of read them again for people who are paying attention.
Great. So the items, and each would be given a score from 1 to 3. 1 sort of puts you to the front of the line, and 3 puts you to the back of the line. So you wind up with a score between 5 and 15, where 5 means we're going to call a special meeting of council in 5 minutes and do it right now, and 15 means good luck. The first item is time sensitivity. The next item is scope, which is to say demand on staff resources. The third item is kind of how much it's part of an existing subject matter area, as opposed to how much of a brand new blue sky item it would be. The next item is the extent of community interest, meaning just how much time would we need to spend engaging the public and listening and holding town halls and all that stuff. And the fifth item is alignment with our city and council priorities. Does anyone want to say a word about my other question, which is I mean, the danger this is, this is like No Child Left Behind. The danger of spitting out a number is that people then take the number really seriously. And so I guess the question is, how seriously are we going to take the numbers that are the outcome of this, knowing that we can't take it 100% seriously because sometimes time sensitivity will trump everything else. So how do we anticipate working through that?
Well, so maybe, the only reason I tried to do numbers was so that I'd have a way to compare the different items, but maybe the product that we produce this is a high priority issue, this is moderate, and this is low priority, and then that gives direction to staff about where to try to, what meeting to try to put it on the agenda.
I don't want to put us back in our...
That's still a number.
I don't want to put us back in our doom loop from before, but I thought that Councilmember Fleming's suggestion of no, we really think this ought to be on an agenda in the next 60 days as sort of the, as the level of specificity, that felt pretty good to me.
So that'd be a high priority.
Well, I'm just saying if you say high, medium, or low, that's a little softer than if you say we want it on the agenda in the next 60 days, which has, again, it's not binding, but it's a specific thing and people can track, did that happen or did it not happen?
Well, so what if our numbers scale, again, I understand we don't want to be totally held to that, but we have to have something to guide us, right? So this is what we've decided. People could hate it. And if it's 1 to 15 I think that's what you said, are the options. 1 to 5? No, 5 to 15. Got it. So if it's 1 to 5 is priority, 5 to 10, right? They're not that many numbers. And so if it's 1 to 5, maybe we say, okay, this is 1 to 5. These are high priorities. These should go on an agenda in the next 30 days or the next 45 days or the next human services. Again, that's a little harder. It's once a month. So maybe that's the next 60 days. If it's 5 to 10, that does something else.
No, my point is we can't be that rigid because, for example, if something scores poorly on everything except for time sensitivity, but it's truly urgent, we can't say, oh, well, this got a 13, so hopefully you'll do it in the next 3 months. We've got to say this is urgent. And so we can't be willing to take the numbers as gospel. We have to have a judgment call at the back end.
No, and I gave that to say this can be our kind of general guiding principle, but yeah, just like anything aside from the SAT score, there is going to be some flexibility, right? So yes, this scored a 12 because of all these other criteria, yet this decision needs to be made by, November 1st because it has to do with snowplows. Therefore, even though and we can, as a committee, I think, say that, right? It scored a 13, but because it's dealing with snowplows, it is actually needs to go on the agenda tomorrow so we can pay the bill. And people would just have to understand that the numbers kind of are guiding us, but we are not wed to them, but we need something to guide us.
I think that's great. As long as I just wanted us to say that into microphones
Yes.
Out loud in advance
Yes.
to establish that we'll take this scoring exercise seriously. We'll think hard. We'll do our best. It'll spit out a number, and then we'll use that number along with our best judgment to determine an actual official recommendation.
Exactly. And I think if we want to have an actual product, which maybe, again, I'm a tangible thinker, we have that, we add that extra column as you mentioned, and this got a score of 4, and then there's another column that explains either, it's a 4, so it's 3 to 6 months, it's a 4, but it's actually time sensitive, it's tomorrow, it's a 4, or, it's a 1, but it needs X, Y, and Z, so it's actually 9 months out, or, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's, and so we're cutting out here. I personally like that a lot. A column with a number and then a column with a final answer, and the responsibility on us if those two look like they're out of whack, we got to explain it.
Right. And the ability for our peers to come and say, I object, I think my 15 is a 2.
Right.
I mean, I think we have to be willing to do that too. Or the city manager to say the same thing.
Speaking of whom, I said at one point that I would call on you next, and that was 400 hours ago. I apologize.
No worries. Thank you. I just wanted to see if we could get to a common understanding that all referrals come to committee or council as discussion items, because when we don't go that direction, staff is sometimes guessing what exactly is asked, and then a lot of staff time is devoted to something that may or may not move forward. So if there is a common understanding or an agreement amongst the council that all referrals come as discussion first, then the committee that receives the referral can review it, get feedback, ask staff for more information if they need it, and then provide a direction, whether it to be to move forward or not, to bring back something or to let the issue, quote unquote, die, that maximizes the use of our resources going forward. So just a thought for the committee and the council to digest and vet.
I guess my reaction to that is I strongly agree that that should be the default. I'm not sure, just as we talk about time sensitivity, I'm not sure that it's practical for that to be a universal rule. And I'm wondering what the two of you feel about that.
So for me, I think that is the difficult part, right? I don't want things rushed through. However, when we look at things that the council bring forward, if they always only go for discussion, and then we look at things that, that sometimes, whatever happens and staff brings something forward and it's for introduction or it's, suspension of the rules for introduction action, then that, I think herein lies some of the rub, because then people feel like, well, my thing has to go for discussion in 85 steps and someone else's thing gets to go for special order business or whatever. And so I'm happy to have, a different discussion about what goes for discussion, what can go for introduction. But I think to say everything goes for discussion, because as we know, sometimes discussion, depending on where it lands, is not clear direction for the staff. And so then it might be discussion, and if it's my referral, I'm very passionate, and maybe Eleanor's very passionate, but the rest of my committee might be like, I don't really care either way. And if that's the way it's operating, the staff is unclear, like, do we move forward with more work on this? Do we not? And then it either leaves me needing to make another referral with, like, I want this to move forward in this direction, or just kind of trying to work the crowd a little harder than I should have to about my item becoming like Eleanor's bird item. Not something that I'm up at night thinking about. And so at the discussion, I might be like, it's fine. But that doesn't really do anything for our staff. They don't know what to do with my, And if Eleanor is the only one really passionate about it, would it then move to action? I mean, would it then move to introduction? Would that be like enough clarity for you as a city manager to say, okay, that needs to go for introduction next, or that kind of fell flat in discussion? I mean, it's kind of like the discussion they just had about the thing that I was really passionate about, the sidewalks, right? So staff made this whole presentation and memo, and the committee was kind of like, oh, thanks. And I don't know that our staff knew what to do with that. And again, I guess that doesn't get to your point about using a lot of staff time, but if we don't have something to chew on in the introduction or discussion piece, I'm just not sure we'll have enough traction to know what to do.
So, well, maybe if an item's for discussion, it would be helpful, though, if the memo that we do need a memo, even if it's just for discussion, it would lay out, some options and really seek specific direction about, yes, we want to do A or B or C. So it wouldn't just sort of feel like it was never going to go anywhere.
We don't usually have memos for discussion, right?
Oh, no, we do.
Sometimes we do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I agree that this is an important issue. I'm not sure that we have a decision to make about this, frankly. I mean, unless the city manager disagrees that we shouldn't have a binding rule, right? So if there's a proposal to say everything goes on for discussion, no matter what, then I think we got to talk about that. But if the view is a lot of things should go on the agenda for discussion, but not everything, we're just going to have to work through that during the course of our effort. Is everyone comfortable with that course of action? I do want to flag one thing that Councilmember Fleming mentioned that I think, again, nothing we are going to really do about today, but it's just going to be an issue for us to track, is the question about staff-initiated items. We had a sort of slightly confusing discussion in rules about which staff-initiated items would come to us and which ones wouldn't. And I think it's obvious that the bills list wouldn't, and the idea that we should all of a sudden enact sweeping regulations on plantings and parkways would. That's a gap between kind of the mechanical operation of city government versus a new policy idea. Drawing that line is going to be delicate, and I think we're going to have to. I wanted to name that as a thing that's going to be worth tracking over time. I feel really good about the discussion we've had about assessment criteria for referrals. Is everyone comfortable moving on? Are you? Okay. So the next item that we ought to discuss is Councilmember Fleming prepared a draft referral form, and that we were, which is similar but not identical to the form that exists online, which I guess has been used internally but not actually by council members making referrals. So Councilmember Fleming, do you want to say a word about what you have in mind here?
Yeah, I mean, I just made this thinking that right now we kind of make referrals either in our direct conversation with the city manager or at call of the wards, and sometimes they're clear, sometimes they're, not very clear, and then they kind of have just gone, until you see it on the agenda again. So this would allow us as a council member to not only make a referral, but also push us to provide some clarity. So for people who are obviously not here, it's just a simple form. It just lists what is the referral request, where I would write, dog waste removal or whatever my thing is, and then my name as the person who submitted it, the date I submitted it, just for clarity by all parties, and the ultimate goal. So my goal for that would be either, Clean sidewalks, I'm sorry, it's a referral. So then, the ultimate goal, and maybe my ultimate goal is policy change or discussion or whatever I would put there. Obviously, understanding that might not happen, but that's what my goal is. Maybe it's just to get information. And then it says, what scope of information would you like to staff to supply on the memo? And I think that's important because, again, we need to give our staff clear direction of what we're looking for so that when we have a discussion, it can be meaningful. And it also gives the referrer an opportunity to, attach any links or materials that they want as part of either a memo or staff to reference or whatever research they might have done on their own. And then it has this line, which I'm not wed to, which says request for suspension of the rules for introduction and action. That does happen quite a bit. I think we probably later on can discuss when that's applicable, but that also would just allow the referral committee and the city manager's office to understand, again, what the goals are and what the requests are. But if you want suspension of the rules for introduction and action, it has the space here where you need to provide rationale for that. So it's based on, time sensitive or finances or whatever, so that, again, we're not just putting things up there that are going to rush through the system for not a very valid reason. And then it has this kind of space that I have set kind of for internal use, which is just verifying that the referral was received. And I would assume that's done by the clerk's office if this is going the way we talked about it before. And then as a committee, we can say where this referral was assigned to. So whatever, committee it was assigned to, or maybe it was sent back to the person who made the referral because there was not enough information. And then we have an approximate date that it would be on the agenda. So if we use this, we could say this is where we could elaborate on 60, 90 days, whatever it is. And then there's this just piece on here about, and maybe this is redundant. Oh, this is actually a redundant line. So never mind my last line here. So it's just a very simple form, but I think having referrals in writing, either on a paper or online or email or something, makes a lot of sense just for tracking. And then we talked about using some kind of referral tracking system that's open for the public if we decide to go that way. This kind of just helps the clerk or whoever's going to manage that system to have something to go off of. But so that's my rationale.
I like all of this except the one where we're actually kind of encouraging people to think about requesting suspension of the rules. I mean, I think that's got to be such a rarely used action process. So, but we could ask for something that asks about the time sensitivity. We ask the person, is this, how time sensitive is your issue, if we wanted to kind of get that kind of information. And that would kind of get at the suspension of the rules issue but more indirectly.
So in terms of this content, I'm totally satisfied with that, especially with Councilmember Ravel's recommended change. Does the city manager have any feedback on this?
No, thank you.
Great. So then, I mean, I hate to get all technical. Is the idea to have a web form that feeds into the tracker? Would that be your intent, Councilmember?
Yeah, that's fine. The tracker, I don't know exactly who's responsible and how, I'm not a tech person. So yeah, if we had a Google Doc or something that led into the tracker would make sense. However we want to do it. We talked about this going to the clerk, so there's a record. I'm not necessarily wed to that, but there does need to be some kind of record. And I think my most important thing for me or for us would be the ultimate goal on this, and then to have people really kind of lay out with the referral list, so we can't just say clean sidewalks. That means a lot of things to a lot of different departments in the building.
Yeah. I'm very happy with all this. My only question, which the city manager might be in a position to answer right now, but also might not, is the security question. In other words, if it's an open web form where you just type in the name of the council member you are, that's problematic. So would we need some sort of authentication system? Even if there were an authentication system, given the output is public, do we want to hold things in an embargo so they can be checked for profanity or vulgarity or something? Like, is there anything we want to do around that other than just have a totally open web form?
I spoke with Clerk Mendoza yesterday for quite a while about this, and her suggestion was that the form feeds into like an automatic email that she would receive. She would review it, make sure it's complete, and then she would then enter the data into the tracker.
And so the only loophole there is we're taking into account that no community member is like, hey, I know how to imitate Daniel, and then just enters a referral as though they're me.
Oh, we definitely have the ability to make sure that you're logged in as you enter your city login.
Oh, I see.
Before
Okay.
you have access to enter into the form.
Got it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought that much about internet security. So, I mean, I guess I should, being the recent letters I've gotten, and I also would think that if someone sent some crazy referral in under whoever's name, that the clerk would be like, that is a little bit out there. Let me call the council member and make sure.
And the clerk is comfortable taking on that responsibility of manually doing that back end work?
Well, we also suggested that if this form, once it's submitted, it would automatically generate an email that would go to the referral committee so that you were aware that new ones were coming in. Right. So that would be another possibility.
And so would we then talk to our peers, obviously, when we figure this all out? If I gave one at Call of the Wards, I also have the responsibility of taking it upon myself and then putting it into whatever system. So they would understand, like, it is not the clerk's responsibility if I verbally give a referral to then do the backhand work.
Yes, she was very clear on how the referral, I believe according to the rules, must be made in writing. And so if you make it at Call of the Wards and you don't then subsequently fill out the form, it's not a referral. It's not a referral until it's been submitted to the clerk.
Great. So it's 10 o'clock. There's some immediately concrete things we need to handle. Number one, we need a plan to finalize in writing our adjustment to Councilmember Ravel's criterion mechanism so we can send it to the whole Rules Committee. Number two, is it possible for someone to just build the referral form right now? Okay, so is that it? You can take that in your...
Can we give some language, though, for the time-sensitive issue? So we're going to scratch out, City Manager Storley, the last question on that kind of internal page at the bottom, and then take out the introduction and action, and then what do we want the time-sensitive language to be? Because if someone could just say, yes, it's time-sensitive.
How time-sensitive is this and why?
And why, yeah.
Okay, how time-sensitive and why, okay.
And then, Councilmember Ravel, are you comfortable making edits to the document you already produced and then emailing it to us for agreement so which we can then transmit to the whole Rules Committee?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. My proposal, I know that, again, Councilmember Fleming has a hard stop. My proposal is that we adjourn and that we schedule a next meeting for a week from today, which is sooner than our regularly scheduled next referrals committee meeting, and that we plan to try to do the thing, that we prepare between now and then by studying what's in the spreadsheet and following up with colleagues and staff with questions that may not be clear to us based on what we see on the spreadsheet, and that we try to do some scoring and maybe even scheduling next week. Is everybody comfortable with that course of action?
So there were 2 or 3 items on here where I felt I did need more information to be able to, evaluate them. So
Me too,
are you
three.
suggesting that we should, between now and next week, try to get that information, or would that be the result of our discussion next week?
My personal plan, I'm not trying to assign you homework. My plan would be for some of these issues, I mean, one of them literally includes an acronym I don't know. So,
Right.
For some of them, I will follow up either with staff or council members to ask questions so that I feel that I show up a week from right now, or a week from an hour ago, ready to speak about all these. But, just to be realistic, I think we'll have plenty to do even if we're not fully aware of every detail about every one of these, because it's a long list still to be dealt with.
So are we doing that individually? Are we going to split the list? Like, how are we going to take that on?
My intent was to do it individually, but if you prefer to split the lists, we should do that in public.
No, I mean split the list. Like I'm going to take the first 5 and
No, I'm just saying we should decide that here rather than
right.
yeah.
What. So what was your thought?
My thought was just do it individually,
Okay.
but thought is maybe a generous way to describe what I did.
And would we kind of be talking? So if I'm talking to, I don't know, Councilmember Kelly about property tax increases, am I kind of working with her using the scoring mechanism, getting more information, or even using our form that's not quite live yet, saying, hey, can you help me kind of clarify this? And then I'm going to use a scoring mechanism to score it and bring it back here ready to go?
I would say that you'd come back feeling ready to have that conversation and not expecting to have the inability to talk about the scoring, right? Like the goal would be to come back next week, and maybe you haven't done the scoring in advance, but when we would talk about it, you wouldn't feel like, oh man, I didn't think about it. Let me go back and ask Claire another couple questions, and then we'll be ready. Which would happen anyway sometimes, right? But the goal would be to sort of gotten answers to questions beforehand.
So would it make more sense for us to send to our peers our referral form and say, we realize you have this referral in her already. We need a little more information to kind of process it through this new process?
I'm just pausing because I'm trying to gauge in my mind how unbelievably irritating that would be to them. I think if people are willing to do it, I think it's a good idea.
Well, it's going to be irritating. I mean, I'm thinking, then if I say I'm going to take these, number 1 through 8 or whatever it is, I'm having several different phone calls, still trying to kind of fill out this form myself, right? Because I need to get some of this information is just not clear.
Well, how many of these issues are really, I think on my look at this list, there may be 4 or 5 where I say, I really do need more information. Whereas the others, I think, are clear enough to make a decision.
And I haven't studied the form, so you've done more work than I have, so I could be just projecting.
Yeah, but I would, if the mayor is going to talk with Councilmember Burns about the HWE policy, which I don't know what that is, I would suggest, could you also talk to him what he means about reviewing the landlord-tenant process, since, there are a couple of his referrals that I'd like more information about, so.
Yeah, I'll take it upon myself just to talk with Councilmember Burns. He and I have had some discussions about these things, so there's a good foundation there. So yeah, I agree. I think I don't think it's necessary to make everybody resubmit everything. And I think that if that turns out to have been a bad judgment, we'll still have plenty to do next week. And so if we show up next week and we do some of we address some of these and think, oh man, there's just more missing information than we had anticipated, then we maybe go back with a more narrow list and ask folks to resubmit.
Okay, then I guess my last question is, in doing these, 4 or 5 or however many we have that we need more information for, at what point are we talking to our peers about this is what we think the new process is going to be?
Well, what I was envisioning was after Councilmember Revelle sends us
Yeah, a cleaned up version.
cleaned up version, or, you know what, and I should just say this out loud, we are a committee, so we have an Open Meetings Act, so we shouldn't email the 3 of us about this stuff. Now that we exist as a committee, we shouldn't have private meetings about this stuff. So I would say instead, Councilmember Revelle is a little bit of a holdup, but not much. We have a meeting next week. I would say that Councilmember Revelle's edits should be in the packet for next week's meeting, and we'll vote to approve it, and then send it to the Rules Committee at that point. Does that work?
And so in terms of the format of this, is it sort of this grid idea, or just the 5 criteria?
I'm not sure I follow the distinction.
Well, I mean, do we just want the verbiage of the criteria, or do we want to show like what the 1, 2, 3 would mean?
I don't think it matters much. I think as long as we're clear that we give everything a 1 or 2 or 3,
Okay,
I think
okay.
that's.
So it'll just be the actual criteria. Got
Yeah,
it.
I think that's fine. If people are confused, we can say more, but I think it's pretty clear. Any further questions or issues before we adjourn?
I don't think so.
All right, so Councilmember Revelle will send staff revision of this that will be incorporated in the packet for next week's agenda. City Manager Storley and her team will establish this form that will be utilized for referrals going forward, and will either build it to and it will generate an email to us and the clerk, and the tentative resolution is the clerk's responsibility will actually be to put that information into this tracker. By the way, that will require a modification a little bit of what of the columns in the tracker. The tracker will also have a score column pursuant to Councilmember Revelle's system, and then kind of a whatever we want to call it, recommended agenda date or recommended time frame column as well. And our next meeting will be 9 a.m. on Thursday, July 22nd. So with that, seeing no further business to come before us, the Referrals Committee's inaugural meeting stands adjourned.